Hello and welcome everyone for joining. We're so glad you're here, and I'm thrilled to be here as well. We're going to get started in the next few minutes, but while we wait for everyone to join, please get settled in. If you could please take the poll question on the screen now. We're curious to find out at what stage have you had the most trouble with candidate retention? Because these are the types of things that in the HR and HR tech space that we're hearing all the time. And we wanted to take a quick canvas of the audience as you kind of roll into the conference, if you will. So we'll give this a couple of minutes, maybe 60 seconds, maybe 120 seconds to let everyone have an opportunity to answer, and then we'll kick off from there. Well, it looks like we have some pretty good answers to our poll here, and it kind of has the bookends on it. What stage are you having the most trouble with candidate retention? It looks like pre-boarding and the first 90 days. So obviously there's some challenges in between as well. We'll cover pretty much all of this on this particular webinar. So we're excited to get started. But before we get started, on behalf of Checkr, I'd really like to thank Paylocity and Codility for helping co-host this webinar. Without partners, it's hard to have wonderful webinars like this. We wanted to personally thank them. Today, we're going to have a discussion around recruiting and onboarding strategies for winning talent during this great resignation, or you can call it the great reassessment. It's hard to find people to hire. And that's one of the major topics of today's theme. Like all good webinars, we're going to have a set of housekeeping items right before we kick off. So just to go through it, if you have trouble with audio or video, please reach out through the help chat on your right-hand side panel, and we'll be able to help you out. Everyone in the meeting will be muted, and we love questions. Best place to put questions is the Q&A side panel on the right-hand side of the screen. We have a packed agenda, but we'll do our very best to ensure we run on time and wrap up within the hour. We know your time is important. At the end of the session, you'll see a SHRM credit come through in the chat. So make sure to write down that code if you'd like to receive credit for today's session. And if you're looking to refer back to any of the content today, please note that we'll be sending out the recording to the email address you registered with. And as always, a few days post-event, you can find this content on Checkr.com. So with that said, let's get started with introductions. My name is Scott Jennings, and I am the Director of Industry Strategy and Market Development at Checkr. So what that means is I have the opportunity to work with customers, partners, industry analysts, anyone who wants to understand by industry or by market, what are the business benefits of embedding Checkr in your platform, and what are the business outcomes for an organization that engages with Checkr, along with many of our key partners. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel today because we have some outstanding panelists that have a lot of great insights to share. Let's start with you, Matty.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you all today. Thanks for attending. My name is Matty Braden, and I'm the Director of Organizational Learning and Development at Paylocity. I have about 15 years of experience in learning and talent. I would say right now, I'm most especially focused on building critical talent pipelines into the organization, as well as developing talent pipelines for future roles internally that we know we're going to have to be able to fill. I'm coming to you today from Easton, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour north of Philly, hour west of New York. In terms of Paylocity, we're an HR and online payroll provider, and we focus on providing companies with modern workforce solutions. And our tagline is, we like to free you up from the tasks of today so that together we can spend more time focused on the promise of tomorrow. And we really believe that when you invest in culture, when you invest in employee engagement, that the sky's the limit in terms of the kind of results that you can drive. In terms of my favorite thing to do, my favorite thing personally is I love helping leaders and employees fulfill their potential and help enable them to have exciting and meaningful career paths.
That's awesome, Matty. Jeremy, how about yourself?
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here as well. My name is Jeremy Schmidt. I am the Director of Global TA at Codility. Codility is a cloud-based platform that helps you build a more structured process around how you can measure a candidate's technical aptitude at the top of that funnel while removing a lot of the unconscious bias that we all know does exist, and just creating a much more collaborative and engaging candidate experience to give you a better chance to close that engineer in arguably the most competitive global market that we've ever seen for talent. I think the most rewarding part of what I do is helping scale organizations and then watching as they grow the cultural ads from the talent team of the people that we're bringing on board. I think that's the most rewarding for me.
That's great, Jeremy. And Carissa, you've definitely won the most colorful background compared to everyone else. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, that'll make sense when you hear where I'm from. So my name is Carissa McCabe. I'm coming to everybody from Denver, Colorado today. I'm a vice president and co-founder at GroundFloor Media and CenterTable. We're a Denver-based marketing communications agency. My role at the agency is focused on recruiting and retaining talent, both for our agency, but then I also manage client campaigns, including a couple of nationally focused recruitment campaigns. So excited to talk to everybody about that today. I'd say my favorite thing about what I do is really solving business problems, whether that's internally for our agency from a staff allocation and business perspective, but externally for our clients. Every one of them has a different problem they're trying to solve. And that's the fun thing about marketing communications. The tools are always changing. And so no two business solutions are ever the same. So I'm excited to talk to you guys. I feel like I have a different perspective to bring in that we're working with people in a really different way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to thank all of our panelists. There's going to be some really great insights shared. I didn't get a chance to say I'm joining you from Tampa Bay, Florida today. So we're happy to have Tom Brady back, and we're thrilled about that. So I'll just want to get that one in. We're relevant in football for one more year, at least American football. But let's kick off with some panelist questions. So question number one, let's talk about how and what around using tools to build a robust pipeline, and what tools are using and how are you using them. So this is getting into a little bit of the technology from building a robust pipeline perspective. And Jeremy, let's start with you.
So I had an old CEO that always used to say to me, Jeremy, how do we know if we're winning if we're not keeping score? And when I think about building a robust pipeline, my brain immediately goes to the data. How do you know what a robust pipeline is, for your organization? And this is something that we've struggled with ourselves for the last 12 months, despite the fact that the Codility tool is used to drive, diversity into the top of that funnel. But then how do you visualize it? And how do you really look at the pipeline optimization and time and stage to understand how that affects and what your pipeline really needs to look like to be successful? So what we did is we implemented a tool called GEM, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with in one way or the other, to help with the visualization and the pipeline analytics. And by doing that, we were able to take our pipeline data and really look at time per stage per recruiter, because that can be drastically different too, and how that affects how many candidates you need in the top of the funnel that relates to a hire. So I think that my mind immediately goes to the data around that, because a robust top of the funnel for one company could be 25 candidates, could be 1,500 candidates for another organization. So I think to define that for yourself, you need to be able to look at the data to understand, hey, I need 50 people top of the funnel for that to result in a hire in the next 50 days. So that's where my head goes immediately, is towards the data side.
Yeah, no, data is extremely important. Connecting those dots and then providing that point of view is really, really important. Carissa, what do you see from your end?
Well, I love that you mentioned data. I think that drives everything that we do too. I've got a client in the healthcare space who's looking to fill some critically important positions immediately. And they have a really great HR team. They have a really great mix of things that they've been using. But what we really tapped into for them came from an opportunity. We started looking around at, like, what are you doing? What are your competitors doing? And then even bigger than that, what are they not doing? And we found an opportunity for them in the digital space, specifically social media ads and pay-per-click, where none of their competitors, including them, were utilizing this space. And we thought, well, let's give it a try. And they really do a great job establishing themselves from a brand perspective and with the users of their brand and all that, but they had never used it to think about how they could potentially reach employees. So one thing I'd say about that is digital ads, digital PPC, that can be a really noisy space. You guys know that. I mean, scrolling through your feeds, there's a lot of information to choose from. And so while we utilize the digital tools, one thing I would mention here in terms of building that robust pipeline is really getting to know your audience. What do they care about? What do they want to see? What's going to stop them in their feed to be like, wait a second, this actually sounds like a job that could be interesting to me. So we spend a lot of time in preparing to use the tools. We spent a lot of time preparing what the messages would be. What are the top things? And we engaged with HR. What are the top things that when they talk to candidates really react to? What are the questions that candidates are asking that we know, across the board, that's a thing that we could pull out and really highlight? What are the top benefits they care most about? So it kind of started, there was so much we wanted to put into the messaging, but again, we have 2 seconds to get their attention and get them to take some kind of action. So we ultimately ended up using a digital tool. It's an ongoing campaign and it's working really well. But I would say the back end of that, getting everything prepared, making sure we have the right messages, the right imagery, the thing that was, we call it snackable content, the quick hit that's going to get them excited and make them want to click through. We spend a lot of time getting that in place. And now that the ads are running and the pay-per-click is running, our job is to continue to optimize that. What are the things that are paying off on behalf of the client? What are the things that are resonating and pulling through? And then we're in constant communication with them because, like everything, they're reviewing, revisiting their benefit structure, and people are reacting to different things as time unfolds. And so we're constantly optimizing to make sure that we're spending their budget in the right way. But really for us, it was just the big picture of kind of saying, where are you not? And what is the opportunity, and taking that leap of faith to give it a try.
Got it. So a lot of times you're looking at not just the snackable content, but where are you going to position that snackable content in terms of where you're sourcing from?
Yeah. And who are we trying, that's exactly right. And who are we trying to attract? What else are they looking at? What else is in their feed? What else is in their universe? And what's going to make them want to switch jobs? They may already have a job. So what's the one thing that they're going to be like, man, I don't have this at my job, or I'm really seeking this as a professional, and getting that just right on the head.
Yeah, so I'm going to a conference in a couple of weeks called the Restaurant Marketing and Delivery Association. And one of the speakers that we had for a panel we're going to do there, they're looking for delivery drivers. And so they're actually marketing into Reddit forums. They're going where the drivers are, and they're trying to pull them on their platform. But that source of where you're going with that message is critically important as well, that's interesting because you're looking at healthcare workers in that particular vein. Matty, on your end, really more on the onboarding end, and we started with a poll where the bookends really mattered. It's pre-onboarding, and then it's after that 90 days. If you put the onboarding spin where you typically play, what are your thoughts on the topic from building a robust pipeline and how that kind of flows into the onboarding piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. I think it's really critical. We've really shifted our thinking. It's interesting. Over the last year, we've shifted pretty significantly, and probably like a lot of you who are in the audience today, of course we had to lean into remote and hybrid, but we want to continue to do that going forward. And I don't know for everybody else's experience, we've seen it as like a little bit of a double-edged sword, because it can be great in terms of broadening the talent pool, right? We're able to reach people in different markets than we ever have previously. But if you're not careful, I think it can also really create culture gaps. I think there's a lot of leaders who, when you were used to working in the office, you just knew, hey, you're onboarding, we'll catch up, we'll grab coffee, we'll hang out. And a lot of that stuff is a lot more challenging to do virtually. So, we believe that rather than thinking of onboarding as a 1 day or 2 day thing, or even like a 30-day focus, we've created a 12-month roadmap for ourselves where we say our goal is to create meaningful and, intentional connections at key moments during your first year. And it's a lot of the key moments, honestly, Scott, that you had up before, right? So it's like that 30 days, that 90 days. We know there's moments where we need to tap into people. And we also know, traditional onboarding, that first day or two, it's like a fire hose, right? You just have so much information coming at you, and it's hard to retain any of that stuff. And so we really try to make sure that we continue to follow up with people to say, do you understand our DEIA strategy? Have you seen that you can join some of our employee resource groups? Do you understand how to take advantage of the many unique benefits that we have? And then we also want to make sure that people get connected early and often to professional development. So we believe that if people feel engaged and they feel connected and they believe immediately that they're a part of something and that you're investing in them, you can get through some of those hurdles at that 30-day mark, 90-day mark, et cetera. And then I would just build a little bit on what was shared previously in terms of tools. For us, I would say the other thing, when you, even before you get to onboarding, there's two things that I've seen us use. I mean, LinkedIn, of course, is a primary tool for us for sure. But we've actually seen, I don't know for everybody else, but I think so many of us get pinged so much on LinkedIn that almost has started to become a little bit of white noise that people start to ignore. So we've tried to use Zoom Info and Swordfish, and those are two tools that you can leverage to get personal email addresses. And so we found, if we have a great candidate and we've reached out a couple times on LinkedIn and it's just not happening, they're not responding, sometimes we'll use one of those tools to get more of the personal email address side. And we find that we get some heads up then as well. It's, again, that LinkedIn is great, but it can create a little bit of white noise. So that's been helpful to us too.
Interesting point there, Matty, on the personal email addresses. Just out of curiosity, I admit it, I use Hotmail. I'm one of the last people that actually uses it. Do you find that a lot of those end up in the spam or the junk inbox and are not necessarily seen? Is there a way to measure that?
We have not been able to measure that yet today, but I would just say in terms of the response rate, it's been pretty good. I mean, there's certainly some people that take the approach of like, how did you get this email address? Like, why are you emailing me here? But I think the vast majority, because we're coming at them with an interesting offer and something that's a good fit, it's great because it just all of a sudden is heads up, like to your point, whether it's Hotmail, Gmail, whatever it might be, people are able to see that. And sometimes we're able to break through the noise that way.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Well, that was question number one. I think we can move on to our second topic here around consistency. And just to kind of throw it out there for everyone, as we all know, consistency is key in just about everything. But especially if someone is onboarding and getting comfortable in the new role, this can have a really big impact on retention and creating a positive experience for both new hire and a hiring manager. And so out of curiosity, what areas of onboarding are most critical to have consistency? And then to double click on that, how do you develop consistency in your onboarding plans? And Jeremy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think most people would point towards some of the most obvious answers around overly communicating, especially during that gap from offer acceptance to their first day. And if you're recruiting across Europe, that could be sometimes up to 120 days before you could get someone started. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong over that time if you're not staying in touch. So I think to breed that consistency, right, if you can articulate the process from the start with the candidates to get that buy-in so they know what to expect, and then following through on those different stages. So what we've done that's been real successful is we send them both a functional and a tactical onboarding plan prior to starting. So one is sort of, hey, these are the meetings that are pre-scheduled for you. Here's the reasons behind them. Here's what we're trying for you to get out of them. And then we have an area for them to be able to leave notes and track that with their onboarding buddy or their hiring manager. And then we have a second piece to it that's sort of a learn as you go, so that we're not overwhelming everybody with their first 3 weeks being every hour of your day is planned, right? Like, hey, we think it'd be good for you to meet the VP of sales. When you feel comfortable after some product training, schedule an hour session with her and talk through, her division and walk through that group and what does that look like. So I think that piece has been real successful for us. And like Matty touched on, it's all about finding a way to get them to connect into your culture and add towards that culture and drive towards the values. And that comes from psychological safety and feeling that you can be your authentic self and bring that to work so that you can provide, the highest quality of work in whatever role you're doing. So I think really going through and aligning with the values and what do we want you to add and highlighting your ERG groups and the things that you're doing at your organization so that everybody feels like, hey, this is inclusivity and I can be a part of this and I'm excited to get going. And I think the last thing that we've done that's been successful too is we have new hire classes with our CEO, and she takes an hour, I think twice a month, to meet with the new hires during that month and tell the story of the company. And hey, where did we start? Where are we at? What are we driving towards? What values do we hold near and dear to our heart? And get to know them a little bit and talk to them about what they can sort of add and bring to the table. And I think that really resonates with our new hires as well.
And just to kind of double click on that one, those are wonderful processes. You mentioned data on the previous question. How do you check in on those? We're off-roading a bit, but how do you check in on those?
So we're trying to build out our first quality of hire metric.
Yeah.
That we're going to start looking at around the 6-month mark. I think getting at least a level playing field from a data perspective has been big for us as we've gone through sort of this large phase scale. We've almost doubled the size of our organization in the last year, and we'll probably do the same over the next 18 months or so. So I think that's the ideal end goal for me, is having a quality of metric hire that you can go back at and track and look at all the data. And then if you do have retention in certain areas, what can you learn from that? And where did you go wrong? And what competency didn't you measure correctly? And how does that tie in through the onboarding process of the feedback that you're getting from the candidates and having that documented?
Interesting. And Carissa, how do you see it from Denver?
Well, what I think is so great about being on these panels is you learn a little bit. I think a bunch of what you just shared is really helpful to me to think about adding on to our work. I'm going to look really closely at my notes for a second because I wanted to reference a article that I recently read. And I'd say in preparing for this, and then just as it relates to my day-to-day job, I've been reading a lot, listening to podcasts, doing all this stuff. But an article that really stood out to me recently, and I think will build on what was just said, is the title of the article, and I can drop the link into the chat, was Toxic Culture is Driving the Great Resignation. And it highlighted research by Don and Charlie Sull and Ben Zweig. I'm not sure how to say his last name. But what I found to be really interesting about their work was they looked across industries, they looked across employees, and they took in all this information and found that toxic corporate culture is 10.4 times more powerful than compensation as it relates to attrition. And so what I want to underscore that, I mean, that's huge, right? People are always thinking like, well, we need to pay more, we need to offer these other benefits. And really the focus was, if the culture is not strong, people are going to leave. And so I think underscoring what Jeremy just shared about the culture piece, to me, that's where you really want to lean in from an onboarding perspective. I heard an interview with these same gentlemen, which again, I'll share the links in the chat when I'm through speaking, but they talked about the fact that almost every company they researched had it in their value statement, in their mission statement, like publicly, we care about culture and we care about all these things. And yet the research they looked at was like, I left because I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel like I could be my authentic self. I wasn't treated well. I didn't have the opportunities I was promised, like basically saying, that vision statement is worthless. And so to me, I think really leaning in on that culture piece. Who are we as a company? How do we show up for each other? How do we show up for our clients? How do we show up for our customers? All of those things, and really leaning into that. I mean, obviously, if you're talking healthcare, if you're talking food service, if you're talking a million other jobs, policies, procedures, all that stuff is important from a consistency perspective. But what really, really matters is that who we are and how we're going to show up. Because if people feel safe, as you mentioned, Jeremy, if they feel seen, if they feel valued, they're way more likely to stay around. And I think what you just mentioned is important too, about making sure that people have time with the leadership of the organization, that they're really feeling like as best you can. I recognize really big organizations that becomes more challenging, but what's the opportunity for them to see that those cultural values are held all the way up here and it trickles all the way down, so it doesn't matter your role, you're valued and seen there. We recently internally have done something a little similar to what Jeremy recommended, in that it's a cultural mentor and a skills-based mentor as part of onboarding. And we've tried to kind of break things up so that it's short-term, long-term. One thing that we heard, we've onboarded quite a few people in the last few years, and one thing we heard was, it was great to have a chance to sit down with the primary leaders right up front, but I wasn't ready to ask them strategic questions. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. And so they liked sort of that, give me the tactical, give me FaceTime with those people, but in a different way. And then give me valuable time couple months in when I really feel like I get what's going on and I can ask more in-depth, more valuable questions. And I think that pressure testing our onboarding plan against people that have been recently onboarded has just been helpful. Every time I'm adding a new idea or removing something that just didn't make sense or shifting the timeline so that it flows a little better, I know all the things I want them to know, but I've been at this company for 16 years. It's really helpful to hear from people who are starting a fresh job. What do they want to know and at what pace?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In particular, the strategic questions 1 week in when you don't know where the bathroom is and you don't necessarily know how to get on Zoom with your particular new company. That's a little
That's
hard to
right.
do. So that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And Matty, I know consistency is big for you as well at Paylocity. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, happy to. We really think it really starts with that first entry moment. I don't know for you all in the past, we would live in this place where individual departments or locations would kind of do their own onboarding, and it made sense. It's like, oh, people are in different time zones, different offices. Now we've really shifted to more of a national approach where we say, look, anybody who's joining the organization, you're going to get invited to a virtual session. We make sure the cohort sizes are small. Sometimes we're starting 180, 200 people at a time. We put them in smaller groups of like 30 to 35, so it still feels a little more intimate. And we found it really ensures that people get the same message and the same experience. And then I think one of the other places we really had to find consistency quickly was we're a high growth company. And so a lot of that has led to we had to find ways to be able to fill roles faster. And one of the things we did as a strategic decision was to say, look, for some of these entry level roles, we're not going to involve the hiring managers. Talent acquisition is just going to take on the responsibility of hiring into the roles. And so we had to create this moment then for the hiring managers to say, hey, you're no longer in the office, you're virtual, you're remote, and you're not even the person that did the interviewing or the hiring. You've got to meet with this person at the end of day two. You've got to set time on your calendar when you know this person's joining the organization. It's really critical because I think as Carissa was sharing, right, it's like people have to feel like they're part of something, that they're cared for. And we find that consistency really helps drive that, right? Because now as your hiring manager, we can sit down. I can help you, as you said, Scott. I can tell you where the bathroom is. I can help you get on Zoom. I can set some role expectations for you. I can set some department specific expectations, things that don't quite fit into that big national, connection point. So that's some of the stuff we really feel is really important to be consistent. I would say beyond that, we make sure that everybody is invited to all the events that I mentioned, like over that first 12-month period. We know not everyone's going to be able to attend. Some roles it's harder than others because you're client facing, you're on the phone a lot. But we feel like it's really important for people to feel like from a fairness equity standpoint that there's never a culture of like haves and have nots, regardless of the role that you're in. You have equal opportunity and access to all the things that we offer.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Those are really interesting answers, I think, to the consistency question. I think the panelists are doing a great job. The moderator, I'm going to probably lower my grade a little bit because I forgot to mention that on the right-hand side, we are running several other polls. So throughout the webinar, please click over on the other polls and just take a look at some of the questions that are asked about which of your hiring tools are you finding most helpful in driving pipeline? At what stage have you are you having the most trouble with candidate retention? There's some interesting data that can be collected and seen, so you can kind of see everyone's point of view across the entire audience. So my apologies for not introducing that earlier. What I will do correctly is I'll introduce the third question for our esteemed panelist, and it has to do with metrics. Time to hire is a standard metric that gets a lot of attention. And what I'd like to do is break this next question into two parts. First is, what tactics have you used to improve time to hire recently to get talent started faster? And secondly, what other metrics are you tracking consistently that go hand in hand with this, or maybe even turn out to be more important for your organization? So Carissa, let's start with you.
Well, I will say right off that we don't actually track that kind of metric, but I do have some thoughts around the kind of this concept and this process, in that we, as a smaller, our agency is about 50 people. So when it comes to my direct experience in hiring people, we are really hesitant to hire quickly. And I think part of that is relative to that culture piece that I talked about. That said, it is true that our clients every once in a while are like, I need to launch this big thing and I'm launching it next week. Or, I have an employee who left. This has happened quite a bit in the last year or so, and I'm sure others can relate. I have someone that's left and I need backfill. While I try and hire quickly, I need backfill for someone who has expertise in marketing communications. So from our perspective, so speaking more probably to those that are in the smaller business area, we have a bench of consultants that over the years we have grown. And so that for us becomes our quick to hire. We've got people that have areas of expertise that aren't full-time employees for a variety of reasons, but I'm working really closely with them all the time to understand what's their bandwidth for us, what's their commitment to other places, when can we flex them up, and when do they have other commitments that don't allow them to be as flexible. So it's a little bit of a different twist on your question. discussion. But there's that. And then I would just touch on real quickly from a retention perspective. We reward our employees. We focus a lot on recognizing and rewarding them when they do flex up, whether that's a consultant, whether that's an FTE. In a smaller business, sometimes that's just the way it is. April's going to be tough because we're down a person and our clients need more, and you're going to work a little more than you might normally. Or it's a crisis situation and everybody's all in over the weekend and you missed your kid's baseball game. We work really hard to make sure we're recognizing people. And within that, I would say just getting to know what they want as far as recognition has been really helpful to us too. For some people, it's just straight up pay me. Other people are like, make sure that everyone knows, what a great job I did in an email. So a little bit of a different twist, but for us, speed is more related on leaning into the team that we have and letting them know that's a part of what their work might look like.
Yeah, and I think that's one size fits all metrics don't necessarily fit. I mean, they're important in some cases, but not necessarily every case. And certainly that's what you were alluding to. Jeremy, I know you started with the data conversation, so I'm sure this is near and dear to your heart. What's your point of view on that time to hire metric, or perhaps other metrics that are more impactful for you?
Yeah, so I remember being at a conference, God, I bet it was a decade ago, and standing on stage and saying that I think time to hire is the most overrated metric that there is. And there was this gasp in the room like I had just kicked a puppy or something of that nature. But I mean, of course, it's an important metric. Of course, it's something that we always have to track and take into consideration. But if you're lowering your time to fill by drastically taking a different level of quality, right, that's not helping you in the long run. So there has to be a balance between building a more effective process, being a little bit more data driven, but pulling in a higher quality individual. So one thing I always recommend to start looking at the time to fill is mapping out your entire process from the day finance approves this rec. What happens from that second to the time that offer goes out? And take some time, put it on a mural board or something of that nature. You will be so surprised at all of the individual small steps that are involved in that process in your organization. That's a big part of where you can find inefficiencies, where you can find bottlenecks, where you can create better process around that so that you have a better chance to lower that time to fill. The second part that we've done on our side is we have a big push towards competency-based interviews. So rather than waiting for one single hiring manager or one team to be able to assess this engineer, right, by defining what those direct and indirect competencies are as a group and agreeing upon how you're going to measure those, that means anybody should be able to pick up that interview to measure adaptability, influence, impact, business acumen, whatever that might be. And so by being able to streamline the own processes on your own side, obviously then you can get through the candidate pool much faster, which we've seen reduce our time to hire on our side of the fence. But I would say take it with a grain of salt and really look into that quality of hire metric, because if you're lowering time to fill and increasing that, man, you got the secret sauce, right? Start your consulting firm and go make some money. But if you're lowering your time to fill and you're seeing, a much higher retention 6 months later, you're just costing yourself there.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I definitely see your point, Matty. I know on the onboarding side, you're kind of the recipient of that time to hire. So curious how you look at the world.
Yeah, it's interesting for us. I mean, we've really had to change and adapt. I compare when I came into the organization a year ago, a little more than that. We would love to have these long interview processes, because Paylocity, I think, is really built on like being a consensus organization. And so, when I interviewed for the role that I have today, I met with an executive recruiter, I met with the hiring manager, I interviewed with two people who would have been my peers, I interviewed with the CHRO, I interviewed with a senior vice president business leader. Like it was a pretty long process and robust. And so we've really tried to challenge ourselves to say, how can we shorten, condense, combine that? Like instead of all these different moments, can we have panels or different things? Because for us, it's honestly, we end up in competition with companies that get candidates through in 1 or 2 rounds. And so having somebody have to meet 5, 6, 7 different people, it just wasn't palatable anymore. So we've tried to really get creative in terms of how we interview. I mentioned earlier, one of the things is that, we try to go back to the different folks in the business to be able to set those expectations to say, look, this is the time to fill. Here's some things that we could do. So in our operations department, which is the largest part of Paylocity in terms of number of employees, we went to the directors and the VPs there to say, look, we can decrease your time to fill if you take your managers out of it. Like for these basic entry level roles, let talent acquisition hire them, and then we can reduce it by 30%. And they went for it. So we've tried to get creative in terms of both what are the expectations from the business, what's the role that HR can play, when do hiring managers need to be involved, who all needs to be involved. And then I would just say the other metrics that we look at besides time to fill, the other things we really keep a close look on is offer declines, people that end up withdrawing during the process, and then no starts. The last one, I don't know for everybody else, but we've rewind the clock maybe 12, 15 months ago, no starts wasn't even a thing. I mean, it would be very, very rare that you would have somebody accept the job, sign all the paperwork, and then not show up for the first day. And it would be like very weird situations. Oh, something happened with my family or something, whatever it was. Now it's like we have a couple of those almost every single time. I mean, and you can tell that the market is just people are out there probably accepting, looking at multiple offers and then deciding. So it's very strange because we've honestly in 15 years, we've never seen that before. And now all of a sudden that's a thing. So we try to look at all three of those. And then where and when we can, we try to get as much information from the candidates as we can to help looking for process improvement. So if somebody withdrew kind of last second, if we had a good relationship going with them, we'll try to reach out and ask for candid feedback and say, hey, what happened in the process? Did you get a better offer? Was there something else that happened? Just so that we can continue to refine.
Yeah, and I think the no start is interesting because if you do business in the light industrial world, in particular, if there's any type of needs where you need to hire today or tomorrow, ghosting was a very big thing it's been that way for a long time. And it's almost like the no start concept has just kind of built from the rest of the economy because that's been going on for a while. And we see organizations in particular, if you get into things like digital staffing, where they built direct sourcing models that effectively say, hey, listen, if you need people that are baggage handlers this afternoon, we have a solution for you, but there's going to be trade-offs with that. It's going to be all technology. It'll check a couple of boxes, but you can't go through your whole process if you want someone to show up this afternoon. And obviously, you don't do that at a tech company, but I think some of that mindset has come into the tech company world where there is ghosting, there is no start. So that's an interesting point of view. So moving on to our fourth question, and this is a really lively debate, so I really appreciate everyone's answers here and insights because I'm learning quite a bit myself. So when you think about tools for making the hiring process better, making the onboarding process better, we know they're critical. And I'm just out of curiosity, what type of tools have you adopted or found critical to winning talent over, let's say, the last 12 months? And Matty, you were the third panelist last time. We'll start with you because I think you're going to have an interesting answer based upon Paylocity does quite a bit, and just curious from your point of view, your ideas on the concept of tools.
Absolutely, yes. This will be the part that everyone will feel like is self-serving. So I apologize in advance, but we do, because we sell an HCM product, we have tools that we believe are really, really powerful for organizations. So we have an onboarding tool. And our philosophy truly is we have a mantra within Paylocity of drink your own wine, drink our own wine. And the idea is that we always want to be advocates for our own product. So we use our own product all the time. We use onboarding to be able to track open roles, track the pipelines. What's the health of the pipeline? What's the time to fill? And then, some of the external tools, like I mentioned before, certainly LinkedIn, Zoom Info, Swordfish, those are all ones that we've used pretty successfully. And then I think when you switch to the onboarding side, we have another really good internal product that I would highly recommend even if you don't use our product, to find something similar. It's called Community, and it's an internal, very like social media type resource. And it allows people to immediately connect with others in the organization that have similar interests, similar background. We have hundreds of active community groups across Paylocity, and it's things as fun as there's like a gardening community, there's a Zen community, there's a sports community, all these different things. And I would tell you, honestly, the most active one and popular one is dad jokes, funny enough, but that's one of the ones that people really enjoy. And it's a simple tool, but we've just found like the crux of it is that it drives connection and engagement. And especially I think when you're joining a virtual company, remote, and we have many roles today that will never be in an office, probably ever, it really creates those immediate connections that you used to get in the hallway, right? Where you'd walk around and you'd see like, oh, you've got an Eagles jersey on. I'm an Eagles fan. Let's talk about football. Or, oh, I see that you like Starbucks. Me too. Let's get a coffee. You just don't get that stuff virtually, and Community has really helped us to drive that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That connection is really, really important. You can always tell who's talking. If you're talking about your own product, you'll say drink your own champagne. Typically, the other side of that is eat your own dog food. But somebody on the Q&A chat panel said, "Oh, there's wine here. Well, there's also dog food." We'll move on to the next one, Carissa. What's your point of view on tools and kind of process and where those meet together?
I think to build off of what Matty just said, we're working with a client who also they have a very strong culture. They used to be all in one building, and they very much leaned into that. You know, I noticed your jersey. Someone so had a baby. Like all these things that nowadays you might not actually know because we're remote, and they have not only in the time of the pandemic been apart, but they've also grown their team, and some of their team is outside of Colorado, which is where they historically had their only presence. And so we've been working together to think about how they leverage their channels for almost exactly what you're talking about, how to create connection when the chances of running into someone at the water cooler are zero, you know, or very, very slim. So I like that idea of kind of creating those connections. From a tools perspective, I mean, I spoke earlier about the idea of just being competitive. You know, who are your competitors? Where are they recruiting? How can you find opportunity to kind of stand out? We also, with LinkedIn, Glassdoor, and Indeed, sat down with the if you have a paid relationship with any of those, we sat down with the representatives, I guess, from each of those on behalf of our clients and said, tell us what we're not using. What are we not doing to maximize these tools? And that was actually really helpful. They were like, oh, you aren't doing X, Y, and Z, or you set this piece up, but you did it like in a rush and you could do it better. So I think there's an opportunity if you're paying for a tool, ask the representative to help you figure out how you might maximize it better. They can't obviously reveal you know, what your competitors exactly are doing, but they can give you industry-wide trends. And I think that's kind of a interesting way to go about that and get the most for your money. And then, I mean, it's not new. There's nothing special about it, but I'm just a big believer in networking. I mean, it's just keeping those relationships warm. If somebody's going to tell you like, oh man, I met someone and they should be a part of your team, or whatever that looks like, I feel like that's just something that we've lost, particularly in the time of the pandemic when it's harder to get together. But I've had plenty of Zoom coffees just talking to somebody. And I mean, years ago, I was with a colleague in New York, and we reached out to Peter Shankman. For anyone who may or may not know who he is, we reached out to him and said, would you meet with us? I mean, this was a long time ago before he was as prominent as he is now, but he was like, yeah. And we were at coffee with him and we're like, why would you meet with two random women from Denver who just asked you for coffee? And he was like, I'm a strong believer in like always take the meeting. You know, if I've got the time and you're in town, why not? I don't know what I'm going to learn from you and you don't know what you're going to learn from me. So it's not sexy, it's not new, but we can all do it. And I just think that that's such a key to keeping your pipeline full, so that when you are ready to call on someone or even build that relationship to where they're at a barbecue on the weekend and they're like, man, I just met someone from this place and they were really cool. And I know you're looking for a job. I mean, you just don't know where that's going to go. So again, not fancy, but I would highly recommend that we think about kind of those tried and true techniques.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, it's always good to keep that in mind. It's easy to forget about it since we're all staring at Zoom so much, but that is very good advice. Jeremy, from a tools perspective, I mean, you've touched on it a couple of different times. Where would you take this conversation?
Yeah, when I think about being part of a fast-growing, smaller organization and talking about, you know, recruiting and onboarding in different tools, my head sort of goes towards the employer branding side of the fence. And what do candidates think or know about you in the market at all, so that you can even drive that experience? And over the last, I'd say, 8 or 10 months, been partnered with our marketing side, and we've been reviewing tools, and we decided to implement something called Comparably. For those of you that have heard of them, they're the organization that sends out all the cool quarterly awards that you see driven across, you know, LinkedIn and a lot of different areas. But Comparably is great because it has an entire like recruiter toolbox section where you can go in and create content based on the surveys and the feedback from your own people, which I think is so much more powerful to push out into the market because they're active employees there. It's not someone that left your company 2 years ago and decides to go leave, a negative Glassdoor review, right? These are people that work for you there currently. And so we've created a lot of content for our individual and functional groups, very specific to what teams, what are they working on? What are the cool things? What are the benefits? And then we're trying to drive out that content during the interview process, as more touch points to create, a more of a white glove candidate experience, which has really helped. But then once they get started, they've had a lot of this information, they've had a lot of those conversations, and they feel more tied in. They also have a great section for employee celebrations. For new hires, they have pre-built templates that make it real easy for you to go in and sort of celebrate those small wins. You can push it out via Slack, or it could be something that goes out through your corporate LinkedIn. So that's one tool that we've had great success with. And I think marketing said it's driven our impressions up over 10 times across some of our different sites as we're driving out different content from Comparably. So that's one tool that I would definitely recommend people take a look at if you haven't already.
Excellent advice, and just some really good wisdom. If we look at this from a background screening point of view, because that's what the business checker's in. So if you're onboarding via Paylocity and you want to kick off a background check, you're going to hear a lot of organizations say there's a hiring shortage out there. And what we've seen on the background screening side of the house is that in many cases, there are very legacy ways of looking at how you background screen employees, which can be a very frustrating piece of the puzzle for an employee that's looking to take a job. So with those hiring shortages, one of the things that always pops up is, where do we find more candidates? And if you intelligently configure your background check solution, you have the ability to say there are certain charges that matter for this position, and there are certain charges that don't. And immediately your talent pool will open up if you take that particular point of view. If you just take a U.S. point of view, and I realize this is an international web conference, but in the U.S., 1 out of 3 Americans has a criminal record. So if you're using a very heavy background check policy, you're going to be excluding quite a few candidates. So you hear about the driver shortage. There's 100,000 drivers that we're short in North America. You could probably solve that just with intelligent background screening. So that's where we see tools really help open up the funnel. And of course, they can be elegantly integrated into things like Paylocity as well. This has been a really great session so far. And I think there's been some really, really interesting data and insights that have been exchanged here. Before we move on to the Q&A piece, what I would like to do is launch a poll to see who would like more information from some of the presenters as well. So I'll give it a beat here to render the poll. And please fill out the poll at your leisure. And while you're filling out the poll, we are going to put the SHRM credit in the Q&A section. So please make sure to write that down. And I'll give it another second before we move on to Q&A. All right, I think the poll can close there. One of the really nice parts about the Welcome platform that we're running the webinar on is you can upvote particular questions so the audience can. So the questions I'm going to ask came from the audience and it was upvoted. So the top vote getter was from Frank Spear, and he said, what is the ideal time frame for onboarding? So Matty, I know you're big on the onboarding side, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I mean, for us, we have a really big focus in the first 2 days on the job. We just think it's really important to be able to set that stage immediately. And so that means for us, we typically only hire twice a month, and that can sometimes be a challenge working back with hiring managers or leaders that want to hire off cycle or just get people in the door really quickly. But we really try hard to align people to those dates because we know that's really going to be critical. So for us, it's really the first 2 days. We spend 4 hours each day inside of a virtual experience. So again, I think as Jeremy was saying earlier, that way they still have other room to breathe and do things and make sure there's computer set up and they feel good about stuff. So we really try to focus on those first 2 days, and then there's that longer thread of we have a 0 to 12 month plan, but it's certainly heavier in the first 90 days. So I think that first week is really critical to make sure that people feel connected, that you've tapped in with them in some way, and that they feel like the basic questions have been answered for them.
Yeah, I think that's right. So in an effort to get through as many questions, I'm just going to kind of lightning round it with respect to the upvotes and just kind of pass them off. One of the other interesting ones, and Carissa, I think you'll have a good opinion on this, is do you have any positive strategies for keeping candidates you do not hire initially engaged so they're more interested on down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I think we joke about it as kind of dating, right? Like we get to know someone, we want to get to know them a little better. There may not be an opening right now, but we want to keep in touch. That's actually how I came to the agency. And then all of a sudden the agency won a piece of business and the conversation was warm and they knew that I was looking and it was a good place to go. So I mean, I think we do a lot of social events. We do a lot of, well, pre-pandemic, but we'll get back to it of, inviting people in from a certain industry to talk to one another, things like that. So I think if there are opportunities to bring a potential candidate in to just get to know your team, contribute to the conversation around your business and the business that your clients might be in, I think that that's always an interesting way. I mean, certainly there's the basic stuff, keeping in touch on LinkedIn and whatever kind of the digital ways. But I'd go back to what I said previously about the networking, depending on how key that client or that potential employee might be. Maybe it's a once a month call or a regular standing coffee or a lunch or something like that. If there's somebody that you're like, we got to keep this person in our sights. If it's a lesser, I think, just here and there keeping in touch. But as much as it can come off of digital and more into in person or at least Zoom, I think that's a benefit.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It feels like you're doing quite a bit on that front, Chris, which is great. And when we start thinking about, and the questions are moving around, so I'm having a hard time reading them. So, Jeremy, do you have any strategies for helping recruiters understand technical roles so they can be more informed when talking with candidates? Because it can be kind of complex.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about it from the candidate side, there can't be anything more disheartening than getting on a call with a recruiter that's asking you questions that they don't have the slightest idea if you're giving them the right or wrong answer. And if you're going down a checklist of how many years of data science programming do you have with R and Python, and they don't have the slightest idea what R or Python is, right? The candidate on the other side of that is, there's no way I'm going to work at this organization, right? I think the second part around that is you need to be able to train your recruiters to have at least a baseline understanding and give them some type of tool belt to be successful when it comes to technical screens. Obviously, people will get better the more they do it and the more they learn, but there has to be some type of training involved there. And then I guess I'll eat the dog food and drink the champagne a little bit, because this is literally what Codility's platform is made for. You could take a candidate through a recruiter screen, a hiring manager screen, a leadership screen, and then do a technical assessment 3 weeks later and find out that they're not even a close fit for the role, right? So driving that at the top of the funnel, but making it engaging, making it collaborative, making it about measuring their thought process and showing the technical skills that you have on your side of the fence, and doing some type of paired programming or systems design to get them into the fold. That's key to being able to lower that time to hire, to create a more equitable and fair process where you're measuring someone's skill set, not where they went to school or, some of the things that people look for in computer science. So I think you have to hire strong technical recruiters. You have to continually to give them training, and you need to supplement that with some type of tool to make it a more collaborative process that makes things go much, much faster in today's world.
Yeah, those are great insights. And we have a little bit different topic here that Kim McLean posted. It's we hire mostly entry-level construction laborers who focused almost solely on their hourly rate. Any suggestions for that type of employee? I'm going to try to take this one. What we've seen in the gig economy as well as in light industrial hiring is obviously the hourly rate is very important. The thing that comes in right behind that is flexibility. So we've even seen large organizations implement almost an internal gig economy so that they have an employee might have the opportunity to work on one construction project one day and then maybe down the street another day. That flexibility gives them a reason to keep coming back to work because they can effectively build out their schedule based on how their day needs to go and how their life is supported. Doesn't work for every business, but it is one of the scenarios we've seen a lot of light industrial companies and even a lot of large food service companies do, is try to mimic some of the motions of that gig economy so that a worker has a reason other than pay to want to stay with your brand. Not perfect, but certainly we've seen it be successful in the past.
If I can add to that real quickly, Scott, that article that I mentioned earlier that got shared in the chat, that research that was done, I don't know that construction came up in there, but grocery store, restaurant service, like some other things that you would expect to have kind of a higher turnover. They do that is mentioned in their work. And it's interesting, the cross-reference to culture, because those people are really driven by, or those employees are often really driven by the pay, but the culture piece fit in there too. So I just point everyone back to that article. I thought it was interesting in that it does have some industry specific information that might be relevant.
Yeah. And Carissa, we'll stay with you. Those are great insights, but we'll stay with you for this one. With women leading the charge of the Great Recession, organizations must create better support system for women and caregivers in the workforce. Mm-hmm. So what have you seen that's been successful, or what recommendations do you have for the group to help support women, given that there's more impact on the Great Resignation as a whole?
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely a difficult one. And one thing I would say that I hadn't thought of this before, Scott, but it may or may not dovetail is to your point about background check as it relates to incidents that people might have. I think it's thinking about what do you really need from an employee, kind of trying to draw a thin line at least between those two things. What do you really need from an employee? And frankly, if you think you can hire a woman who can do an amazing job, and if you can do a part-time role or a job share role or something that allows for more flexibility, or if flexibility isn't an option, how are you showing up for those folks? And I say women obviously are a big piece of that, and I'm a woman and my husband works, and we have, there's a lot of that involved. But I think just thinking about families too, and normalizing conversation around mental health. And I mean, men take care of their kids too, and families come in all sizes and shapes. And so what is the conversation that we're trying to normalize? What is the support that we want to provide to people? How do we want to show up for them? I mean, I'm lucky to work for a woman-owned, woman-led company, so there's no concern if I have to walk out the door right now to pick up a sick kid or take care of an ailing parent. So I think just really getting clear on what is the thing that you need the most from that employee. And if you've got an amazing candidate who can do the job and just needs to know that you see them and you can have some flexibility around what their day-to-day life might look like, that to me can be a win. It's just flexibility on the employer's part. And sometimes it's just getting out of that what we've always done or what we typically would hire this role for.
Well, that is a great way to wrap up a fantastic session. Thanks for all of your questions, everyone. As a reminder, if you'd like your SHRM credit, be sure to grab the code from the chat. This recording will be sent out to you in the next few days. And I'd like to thank everyone who attended, and a big shout out to our group of speakers and partners for their help in making this discussion possible. Wherever you are, we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And I'd just like to say thank you, and we appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.